If I read the scriptures well, there are so many things there which seem to be a reality.
There are stories and people in the Bible that are easy to take for granted. Powerful kings, battles with giants, amazing faith, even overwhelming failure. The question is, do these narratives describe real events? Or are they simply legends? What does the physical evidence indicate? Is there evidence for the United Kingdom of Israel?
Sometimes we do have questions where we scratch our heads, but in archaeology we say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We've only excavated about 5% of the land of the Bible. 95% is still underground.
Jerusalem, which is one of the most excavated places upon earth, has a black hole.
We're digging through layers of history.
Something definite happened right here.
Wow. We are way off the beaten path now. Way off the beaten path. God's people demanded a king. God selected 3 men, an insecure man of great stature, a shepherd who slew a giant, and the wisest man to ever live. We are searching history, geography, archaeology, and scripture to find the answers. How would you respond to critics? Can the Bible be trusted?
Jerusalem itself leads in the fact that there is unequivocal proof that there is a connection to the Bible.
Everything that they found dates exactly to the time of King David.
So we're not talking about fairy tales, we're talking about real people, real places, and real events.
Come with us as we search for a king. I've been a student of the Bible for a long time, studying and searching for the truth. As a Bible teacher in the United States, I've been asked if Israel's United Kingdom really existed. Were the first kings of Israel real? Are the biblical narratives of events like David and Goliath accurate? My name is Jeremy Dehut, and I've met up with Barry Britnell, a seasoned traveler and close friend. He's been to Israel close to a dozen times, and he'll be my guide on our journey through this country. We're going to talk to experts in the field of archaeology and examine the geography, comparing everything to what the Bible says.
We're going to be able to visit a number of places that have bearing on the United Kingdom. I think we should begin our journey where the scriptures begin. The story of the United Kingdom begins at Shiloh.
Did Shiloh exist? Was it a real place? Does it match the location of the biblical text? Does the function of the city serve the same function that it did in biblical text? Was it a holy site? Were sacrifices offered there? Those are all questions that I think can be helped by the study of archaeology.
Back in the 1980s, Israel Finkelstein led an Israeli dig here, and you can see the work that they did exposing the big fortification wall that surrounds the entire perimeter. What we have done is take his work, and on the other side of us, the work that the Danish did in the 1920s and 1930s, and we're connecting the two.
Now, the tabernacle supposedly was here for several hundred years. Do you have any places here at the site where you think it stood?
It's all about the Mishkan, which is the presence of God, and I think it answers that most basic of all human questions, like how do I connect with God? The tabernacle gives us a way to do that, and this is why it's so critically important. And in the center of it is the Ark of the Covenant. These are the main ideas. Was the tabernacle on the northern platform outside the city wall? Was it on the summit, the apex of the tell? Number 3, it could have been on the southern approach. There's 4 churches on the southern approach. Well, the Christians seem to really like the idea of the tabernacle being there because they're building their churches there on that spot. May have also been functional. It's very flat and it could have fit over there. Now, I've introduced a 4th possibility, and that's that the tabernacle may have been mobile at Shiloh. That it was not in one spot. By its very nature, it's mobile.
Right.
They are slaughtering a large volume of animals. Certain times of the year, if you've got the tabernacle set up, say, down here, and the wind is blowing this direction, it's just going to be unbearable and not hygienic. Maybe seasonally, the tabernacle is moving around Shiloh, so it's not that one side is sacred, maybe the whole side is sacred.
And are you finding evidence for Israelite presence on this site during the Iron Age when Samuel was supposed to have been here?
Oh, absolutely. We've got abundant evidence of that. You see a transition here from the Amorites who dwelled, sometimes we say Canaanites, but in the hill country, they're Amorites actually that were living here. In some ways, you can see that a different ethnic group or a different theological persuasion has come in. Do we see a shift in the material culture? Do we have Hebrew inscriptions and writing? Yes, we do. So there's no doubt that in the period of the tabernacle, that there were Israelites at Shiloh. We're just inside this 5.5 meter wide perimeter wall that went all the way around the site. And what we have are storage rooms that are built against this. What we're after is an understanding of the stratification of our site. And you can see the separation where we've got a lot of tumbled, crumbly, grayish material into a brownish, reddish soil down to about right here. So that's about a 10-inch spread. Now we know we're changing time periods. Something definite happened right here. We're reading the block. What we believe is that this represents the Iron Age right here. This is the period of the tabernacle at Shiloh. We've got late bronze, middle bronze underneath this layer, and Hellenistic and Roman above this layer. Kind of trim the block so that you get a better look at it. When I do, we're gonna lose this piece. So now we can get a good look at that. That's been worked, hasn't it?
That is so light.
So that's clearly man-made. It's pumice. So put it in our finds bucket right there. As we trowel through, there's a nice piece of pottery.
Looks like a rim.
So this is a whole mouth vessel. This looks like it's from the Iron Age, probably Iron II. Now here's a bone.
What type of animal bones are you finding here and in what quantities?
We found 2 to 3 times the quantity of animal bone here at Shiloh in season 1 than we have found at our other excavations. And I think that's, we've got good reason for that.
Yeah.
We have an ancient text, the Bible, that indicates that there was a cultic site that operated a sacrificial system here. There was a massive favisa or bone deposit in area D over here on the east. Only bones from the biblical sacrificial system within that bone deposit. And interestingly, we get about 1% pig bone. In the pre-Israelite period, it's 4%. And then when you move into the Israelite period, it's 1%. That's a significant drop.
Yeah.
And so again, that's an ethnic indicator that there's a change in who's living at the site, or at least their value systems or their cultic understandings have changed. So the bones are very interesting to us. Okay, that's charred pottery, that's good. We've got the naked eye of the trained volunteer. Then we have a metal detectorist checking. Now we're checking a 3rd time. Then it's going to go through wet sifting for a 4th time. We found that when we dry sifted things, many times you could have something as important as a scarab that still looks like a clod of dirt. And when you wash it with a hose, wow, you realize the things that you've been missing. Maybe we're gonna have markings on here. Yeah, we're already seeing grit. We could have Hebrew lettering on here. You can already see, look at the difference between the pottery that we've washed and what we haven't washed. So it's popping. Sometimes we're wanting to do analysis, so I want to double check everything before we publish it. So we'll take something like this, for example, and when we get in the lab, we'll look at it under a microscope, and I have a feeling I'm seeing part of a Hebrew letter there, but I'm not sure it could be a random marking, so I want to get it under a microscope. So let's pull out these pieces, and when we're in the lab, we'll analyze them more closely and see exactly what we've got.
The development of the central place of worship for the Israelites through the United Monarchy is an important thing to follow. And I think the text implies that Shiloh was actually destroyed by the Philistines after the death of Eli and his sons and the loss of the ark. The central place of worship started there, and then it moved. I was thrilled just to go to the site.
Scott knows of a lab near Jerusalem. It's in an undisclosed location. A number of these labs have artifacts that are valuable, or they may be politically or religiously sensitive, and so they don't like to advertise exactly where these labs are located.
Our lab is pretty unique here in Israel. You find a space that's available, you get good lighting, you've got tables together, a microscope, water, perhaps some chemicals and brushes and tools, and this is the way that we work. Some of these artifacts that we excavated, then we're able to look at them under magnification and see some things that we couldn't tell in the field, obviously. And I know one of the things that really caught your attention was this jar, looking to see if there are any markings that we missed, any lettering, anything that's intentional around the rim. And I'm also looking at the size of the inclusions, and it's exactly what we would expect. So we would pretty confidently date that then to Iron II. Maybe once every season we get a whole vessel, and we get about 2,000 broken pieces a day. When it has writing on it, a sherd becomes an ostracon, and now it is elevated in importance to a whole nother level.
Sure.
This also caught our eye. It's pumice. Why did it catch our eye? Because it's not native to Shiloh. I mean, somebody brought this from up north, where we have the volcanic material up in the Golan. It's clearly man-made, it's clearly worked, and it is kind of exciting sometimes when you look under here. You'll end up seeing a letter or a little bit of gold that's embedded that you didn't expect to see that gives you a clue. That's an interesting piece. Now, the bone analysis at Shiloh is critically important because we're dealing with the biblical sacrificial system.
What you were saying at the site earlier was that that percentage is consistent with an Israelite occupation, that you see that percentage of pig bone go down to 1%.
Well, when you're moving from, say, an Amorite-controlled culture to an Israelite culture, you see a significant drop in the percentage of pork that they're consuming. So we're not talking about fairy tales here. We're talking about real people, real places, and real events. Notice now, under magnification, we can see ridges and lines and all kinds of things. When I sit with our zoo archaeologist, I'm just fascinated. The things that she's seeing there that I wasn't. Okay, yeah, see if you can see that collagen there.
When you've got that collagen, you're able to do radiocarbon testing on that.
That's right.
Once it's all been preserved and it's been analyzed, and you want to hang on to it for a while, where does it go?
We have a storage unit at the Israel Antiquities Authority that's devoted to our material. Every one of these has an object number assigned to it. So when we want to go back and retrieve it for further study, we can easily get it out. So I hope you have high expectations, and no matter how high they are, they're going to be exceeded. So this is one of my favorite places, guys, because you can see that it's floor-to-ceiling artifacts and it's super organized.
How big is this place?
Oh, this is the size of a couple of football fields.
Wow.
Just think back to the famous Indiana Jones scene where they're storing the Ark of the Covenant. Welcome to that warehouse. In archaeological terms, when we're talking about the United Kingdom, we're talking about what we would call Iron I, or the transition between Iron I and Iron II. This entire section is Iron I material, which would be roughly from about 1200 to 1000. So if you want to understand what the period of the judges would like, and that transition from, say, Samuel into Saul, what was the material culture like? This is it. This is what we would call a collared rim jar. Very typically Israelite. You find one of these, for example, inside a 4-room house with an absence of pig bones, and now we've got ethnic indicators that we're dealing with a different material culture than had preceded them. The pottery is somewhat static at the beginning because, remember, God had told them, you're going to live in houses you didn't build. You're going to occupy cities you did not construct. They really don't know a whole lot about pottery making at this point. So when they come in, let's say around the year 1400, the pottery types don't really change much until around the year 1200. So those first couple of centuries, they're very homogeneous with the Canaanite, Amorite culture that's here.
Which makes sense.
They're learning from
They're
them
learning,
how to make pottery.
Well, one of the reasons I appreciate coming to a place like this and looking at this and learning about it is because, quite frankly, I don't know that much about pottery. And so there's a separation between what I know and what I need to know. And I think in doing so, we understand the context of the way those verses are written and the people of the time.
For most people, when they hear pottery or the study of pottery, they would just naturally think, that has got to be so boring. Digging up broken ceramics out of the dirt, it's got to be all the same. And what you've shown us is it's not.
No, it's not.
It shows the development of a culture, artistic expression, and it's fascinating.
One of the greatest things about my job is that I learn something new every day.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm an expert, but all that has done is give me the ability to understand how much I don't know so that then I can add to it. I just had this strong desire to understand their culture then and there in the setting so that I can peel the whole thing back and reevaluate what I believed and why I believed it, set it in a context, and go from there.
I think there's a resurgence in that. I think that even the generation coming behind us, there's a strong desire for that information. You mentioned that you can attempt to triangulate a time period by using several different methods. What are those methods?
Okay, so we look at pottery, coins, because when you have a new person in power, it'll say year 3 of, and then we also can use scarabs. The Latin word scarabus means beetle, and so what we have are each one of these in the shape of a beetle.
Look at that.
What you have is each pharaoh, when he comes to power, he creates his own iconography for that administration. So we have very good dates in Egypt, and no future pharaoh ever uses that same iconography. So when we can get a scarab in a clear archaeological context, we can use it to date everything else. All of these scarabs would have had gold on it. So at some point, before these scarabs were discarded, somebody pulled the gold off of them. But this one, it got left behind. So you can see how beautiful this would have been.
Yeah.
We do get them down into the Iron Age. At Khirbet el-Makadar, we found one from the Iron II period, Samtik scarab, which was the first one ever found here in Israel, so it was pretty significant. So there are a very, very valuable means of dating.
There's a school of thought that increasingly doesn't believe that the United Monarchy existed. They think that the stories of Saul and David and Solomon are propaganda pieces for an Israel government. With all the time that you've spent researching and digging in Israel, what do you think about that theory?
Well, we have two schools of thought. We have the minimalists, which are saying, well, they existed, but it wasn't exactly what the Bible describes. Then we have another group, mythicists, that are just total deniers, that it didn't even happen at all. We have found the opposite. We have found in the material culture, if the Bible says that there was a river, we can find the river. If there was a mountain, a city was in a certain place. We find just many, many synchronisms that passes the smell test. It's what you would expect to see from the literary description that you have. And so we have found just a lot of direct synchronisms between the archaeological data and the biblical text.
The time that you've spent researching and digging and exploring the physical material is that it's reinforced your faith.
Right. I was a Christian before I began excavating, so it did not bring me to faith, but it never scared me to examine the tough questions. Sometimes we do have questions where we scratch our heads, but in archaeology we say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because something happened, let's say a city was burned and we can't find evidence of it, well, a lot of things could have happened to that burn. Wind and rain and future peoples could have scraped the foundations clean. We've only excavated about 5% of the land of the Bible. 95% is still underground. And so when we do have some sort of gap between what we expected when we read the text text and what we find in the culture, you think there might be some clues in the other 95%.
There's some potential there.
Our direct goal is not to prove the Bible or to bring people to Christ, but in the process, is there an apologetic function of archaeology? You better believe there is, and it comes across all the time.
I think it was important to start with the archaeological piece. Just the sheer volume of what they're finding in the material culture and archaeological sites that attest to synchronisms from the material culture in the Bible. I wish everyone could feel what I felt as I walked into that site, and to feel just the weight and the enormity of there is so much here, and such a great percentage of it speaks to a united monarchy and the biblical text being validated. There's a lot more to do, but I think this was a great first step in trying to answer this question. I think it's important to talk about Israel's enemies, especially the Philistines. They're mentioned all through 1st and 2nd Samuel. Israel's enemies play a key role in the nation demanding a king. They wanted a ruler that would go out and fight their battles for them like the other nations had. That is a part of the catalyst for them prompting Samuel to go to the Lord and find somebody for them.
During the reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon, we read about a number of nations that they had battles with. But the one that keeps creeping up every couple of chapters are the Philistines. We are in one of the Philistine cities. This is the city of Ashdod. Now, these ruins around us are actually from Crusader times, so they're much later than the time of the United Kingdom.
Do we know where the Iron Age Ashdod was?
Yes, a lot of those ruins are about a mile inland. This was one of the 5 cities of the Philistine Pentapolis. Ashdod and Ashkelon and Gaza are right here very close to the coast. Gath and Ekron are about 8 or 9 miles inland on the eastern side of the coastal plain. As we read through the book of 1 Samuel, the really first interaction we have with them comes with a battle between the Israelites and the Philistines a few miles north of here. The Israelites lost the first battle, and so they thought they would take their good luck charm as the Ark of the Covenant into battle with them. Well, unfortunately, the Philistines captured the Ark and brought it to the city of Ashdod.
Now that did not go well for them.
It didn't.
When the Ark of the Covenant, the Lord's mercy seat, is brought into Dagon's temple, and when the Philistines come in the next day, Dagon, this stone statue, is on its face in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And so you have their idol in a position of worship and adoration in front of God's mercy seat. And they prop him back up and don't make a whole lot about it until the next day when he's down again, but his head has been removed and his hands have been removed, and they're lying on the threshold of his temple. God has humiliated, he has defeated what these people are worshiping.
Once the citizens of Ashdod got tired of that, they sent the Ark of the Covenant over to Gath, and then it stayed there for a little while, and they sent it to Ekron. And at that point, the Philistines made the decision, we need to send this back to the Israelites, and they sent it up the Sorek Valley.
It is so gorgeous right here. Just beyond here as you move east, it's still very fertile. Why would the Philistines want to continue heading east into the Jordan Rift Valley?
Well, like any nation of that time, they want to expand their borders and they want to control more people. And of course, if they were able to conquer the Israelites, they would use them as slaves for their own good.
Not only do we know where a lot of the major events took place on the Israel side of things, but even their enemies, they're historically grounded and rooted. We know where their locations were.
The best way to understand the full relationship between the Philistines and the Israelites is to not only know the people, but also know the geography. And probably the best way to do that is to get above it.
I think to understand a lot of the time of the United Kingdom, I think it's important to understand the geography as well. And of course, there's really no better place to do that than from the air. And so what we're going to do, Jeremy, is we're going to head over the Shiloh, which was an area between the coastal plain and the hill country. It was the border area between the Philistines, who lived in the coastal plain, and the Israelites, which lived up in the hill country. there was not very many ways of getting from the Mediterranean Sea, for instance, up to Jerusalem. So those small valleys in the Shiloh were extremely important.
Whoever controlled the valley controlled the access.
That's exactly right. And that just jumps out at you when you see it from this perspective. We're looking west down the Soaring Valley. The Philistines, after wanting to return the ark back to the Israelites, put it on 2 milk cows on a cart up this valley. The citizens of Beth Shemesh saw the cart coming down the valley and went down there and got it. Just south of the Soaring Valley, we're coming up on the Elah Valley. Yeah, it's raining down here in the Elah Valley.
Not able to do Elah right now?
Not right now.
I can take you to Jerusalem if you want.
Yeah, let's do Jerusalem.
Okay.
Jerusalem? Okay.
Yeah.
וויסקי פאפה, אנחנו נמשיך לכיוון ירושלים ולאחר מכן נחזור לכאן בגלל...
513, ישראל, פסק 9.
Okay, we are approaching the old city of Jerusalem. Okay, we're flying almost directly over the city of David right now, which was the original Jebusite city that David and Joab conquered.
Wow. Wow, I see it.
The Dome of the Rock, of course, sitting on top of the Temple Mount.
It's amazing to see the landscape change, the topography change so quickly.
This land is so small. I mean, it's only 40 to 50 miles wide and, about 150 miles from Dan to Beersheba. But the differences in elevation and contours of the land is quite striking. Try for the Elah Valley?
Continue?
Yes.
Okay.
The Elah Valley goes from east to west. You can see the entire battlefield right here. The Philistines were on the hill on this side of the valley. The Israelites were on the opposite side on that hill. You can see the valley there below us with the brook running through the valley. This is the brook that David would have picked up his 5 smooth stones when he went out to fight against Goliath. But this is a beautiful, beautiful view of the Elah Valley.
That's an incredible perspective right there.
Where this famous battle took place.
Yeah.
Okay, in just a minute, we're going to come up on ancient Gath. Gath, of course, was the hometown of Goliath. It's kind of ironic to think about that Goliath, as a young boy, may have played in the Elah Brook, which was the same brook that David chose stones out of that later killed him.
Oh, this has been an adventure. I mean, how often do you get to do something like this? It was so helpful to meet Scott and to go to an actual archaeological dig and see how the archaeological process works. Then to go to the IAA warehouse and seeing everything they've got there.
I loved how organized that place was.
There's just so much there that I think speaks to the period of the judges leading up to the United Kingdom. And seeing Ashdod and realize that not just the Israelites left a footprint here in the land, but even the enemies that they fought, the Philistines, left footprints in all of those cities. The plane ride gave a perspective, just like you said, that you really needed to get above and see how the valleys moved, to see which way the roads went. All of that together acts as evidence that corroborates the first several chapters of 1 Samuel as the period of Judges winds down. The United Kingdom history transitions from the Judges to the Kings, where Samuel supposedly anoints this Benjamite named Saul. Is there any evidence that points to the existence of the kings of Israel specifically?
Yeah, I believe there is. I can think of 3 or 4 places that you will enjoy going to. In fact, one of them is the location of one of the most famous stories in the Bible.
For Israel, Gilgal became a significant location, but it's not something that we know exactly where it is.
We know that it was northeast of Jericho somewhere, probably 3 to 5 miles. There was another Gilgal that was especially associated with Elijah and Elisha that probably was not this same location. It was probably up in the hill country. Among the things that they remember from this location is there was the original landing point. When they crossed the Jordan River, which sits about 2 to 3 miles to our east, this was where they camped for a long time. The word Gilgal literally means a circle of stones, and a lot of times those were used in religious practices.
And some people speculate, since it was a place of circular stones, some place that was more of a sacrificial site, it makes sense that we might not have as much to find. To imagine Moses being on the other side on Mount Nebo looking in, and to imagine all of those Israelites crossing the Jordan across a dry riverbed and setting up memorial stones that came from the bottom of the riverbed, you understand what a historical national monument just the spot would have been. And so it makes sense that the place of primary sacrifice for their first king was at that spot.
Samuel would rotate between Ramah and Mizpah and Bethel and Gilgal as he did his yearly duties. Saul was told by Samuel that there was going to come a time in which he was going to need to meet him here and to wait on him so that Samuel could offer sacrifice. Saul waited and waited and waited, and when Samuel didn't come quick enough for Saul, he went ahead and offered a sacrifice.
At that sacrifice, Samuel proclaimed something very strong against Saul.
Samuel actually told Saul that he was going to take the kingdom away from his family and he was going to look for a man after God's own heart.
I think there are personal lessons that we can all learn from Saul and the mistakes that he made, where we get ahead of God, whether out of fear or desperation. We don't wait. And so we act out on our own and try to solve our problems in ways other than what God has instructed.
Later in Saul's life, Samuel had given him the instruction to utterly destroy the Amalekites. When Samuel arrived here at Gilgal, Saul had saved King Agag and a number of the best cattle. This did not sit well with Samuel.
Well, he had disobeyed God's instruction, and he'd failed to finish the battle. And Samuel actually picks up a sword, and he's the one who kills King Agag at Gilgal on the spot.
And it was at this point when Samuel and Saul parted ways. It mentions in the Bible that Samuel never saw Saul again.
And it was a dramatic parting. I mean, when Samuel explained to him that the kingdom had been removed from him and that God was going to be looking for somebody else, Saul clung to him, tore his robe. Samuel used it as an object lesson. Just like you've torn my robe, God's torn the kingdom away from you. I think it's fitting when we're talking about Saul to come to a place like Gilgal where we're not exactly sure where it is, because there were some things that he did for the kingdom that were positive. He was the first national ruler. He was the first one to try to take the military out and to transition from the judges to a king. But in a lot of ways, his kingship was temporary. And so just like Gilgal, we're not exactly sure where that was. That's kind of Saul. My personal opinion is that the text indicates he was always ill-suited to be a ruler. And it seems to hint that God gave them the ruler they deserved. They had rejected him, and God was going to give them a leader that was suited to helping them learn that they needed to rely on him. Things really didn't start to progress until you get to David. After God rejected Saul at Gilgal, God sent Samuel to anoint somebody else, a man after his own heart. And he sent him to the home of Jesse the Bethlehemite, so someone that lived in Bethlehem. Samuel was afraid that Saul would hunt him down when he found out that he was going to anoint another king. God actually gave Samuel a cover story of going down and offering a sacrifice with this family. They went through 7 of Jesse's sons, didn't find the right one, and Jesse ends up explaining that he's got one more son who's out in the field taking care of the sheep.
And that's exactly where they found David. David would have been out in an area just like this.
I'm seeing these little paths cutting through the field. What are those?
Well, those are actually paths caused by the sheep as they walk through here. Shepherds still bring their sheep to these hillsides even today.
This is not what I would have pictured a field to look like.
We often have the idea of pasture land and where you would take sheep to graze as being nice and lush and green. But we're in the hill country of Judah, and this is the area where people would have been.
I don't think it's an overstatement to talk about how formative David's time was as a shepherd as a young man. You know, he references the lessons he learned taking care of his sheep and defending them when he's explaining to Saul, look, God took care of me fighting off a lion and a bear. He's going to take care of me as I go out and fight this Philistine. He refers to David as the shepherd of Israel, how he took him from shepherding sheep to shepherd his people.
And it's interesting too that once you get to the New Testament that Jesus pulls that imagery to talk about himself. And he says, I am the good shepherd. Of course, a good shepherd, just like David would have been, would know how to take care of his sheep and know how to provide for them and protect them.
We've seen them responding to their shepherd's call. You know, he'll whistle, he'll click, he'll have an instruction, and they turn and they pay attention. Taking care of animals is not always a glamorous job. You know, it's smelly, it can get dirty, you're out in the open. It was that kind of responsibility that God used to get David ready for leading the kingdom. The occupation of a shepherd hasn't changed from David's time to now. Same country, same hillside, same type of pastures, same trails. The Bible knows what it's talking about. As it describes this millennia-old occupation that was so formative, it just really helped to visualize that. It makes it come alive. After Saul was rejected by God and Samuel, you try to imagine how much turmoil he must have felt, trying to figure out when his time as king of Israel would be over. Samuel, in secret, anoints David, but he hasn't been installed as a king yet. Saul is trying to fight these battles with the Philistines, wondering when he's going to be replaced.
And that brings us to one of the most famous stories in all of the Old Testament, as we walk beside a brook in the Valley of Elah. If I were to ask someone, tell me the story of David and Goliath, they would tell me that there was this giant, he came and fought against the Israelites, and it was a wonderful opportunity to show the faith of David. And they would be exactly right. That's the right story. But the Bible tells it a little bit differently. The Bible scopes it in geography. In 1 Samuel 17, it starts off and says, now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and so they were gathered at Soka, which belongs to Judah, and Soka is located just along that ridge over there on the eastern end of the valley. And they encamped between Soka and Azekah. Now Azekah sits just around the corner here. So we are in between Soka and Azekah. It said Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up a line of battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, that mountain over there, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with a valley in between them. And that's how the Bible sets up this story. Then it introduces the main characters of the story.
Well, then later on we know that when David finally went down to battle with Goliath, he didn't use any of Saul's armor or his sword, but he crosses a brook and picks up 5 smooth stones.
Right, and of course we just crossed the brook ourselves right here below us.
So he would have come down from the Israelite camp, crossed that brook, and then gone down into the valley.
That's exactly right. Then David came out here and faced the giant, and I believe at that point he gives one of the most moving speeches that's in all of the Bible. In 1 Samuel 17, after Goliath has taunted him, it says in verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Such a beautiful speech, and of course we know that as soon as he finished that, he took one of those stones, put it in his sling, and killed Goliath.
It's obvious reading that and sharing that is a very emotional thing. Does it hit you more to read that here in the valley?
There's something about coming to this exact location and rereading it again. When I read this passage, I often think about my own life. And there are times in my life I wish I had the faith to stand up to things that trouble me and things that taunt me in life. It's obvious that David was able to face this person who was much bigger than him, but he knew where his faith was, and he knew, based on past experiences with God, that he was going to be the victor here, as with anybody if God's on their side.
I think everybody who reads the story of David and Goliath feels that way. That there are moments where we wish we had demonstrated the faith of David in overcoming obstacles and trusting in God, not just having faith in general, but trusting that God would deliver us and that he would respond. And in the development of the context of 1 Samuel and the United Kingdom, you've got this incredible transition happening between Saul and David. You have the king who's giving his garments, his armor, to somebody else. You've got David who ends up using a shepherd's sling as his weapon of choice, but it was Saul's tribe, the Benjamites, that were renowned for their accuracy with a sling. So David's using Saul's tribe's weapon to take down this giant. It should have been Saul down there, but he didn't do it. The writer of 1 Samuel is establishing David as Saul's replacement. He's the next anointed, he's the next king. And to be here, it's not just another story, it's not just another myth. It fits the geography of the land, and he puts so much attention and detail into that to help us establish that. Every culture lionizes its heroes. They glorify and exaggerate facts. It's easy to think, and I know that there are skeptics who do. They read the David and Goliath story and think, well, that's just so made up. But with what Barry pointed out, it's so rooted in accurate geography, even subtle details in this quest for, was this real? Did it actually happen? It fits the history of the period between the Philistines and the Israelites. The entire world is familiar with the David and Goliath story. From a literary perspective, it's powerful because in David's speech, he emphasizes, he already knows that people are going to hear about the next couple of minutes for the rest of history. And he wants them to understand something about God from it, not something about him. The reason that Goliath went down was because God helped David do that. And the God of Israel, the Yahweh of Israel, was the true and living God.
Walking around here in the valley is a really neat way to experience it. But there's also other vantage points as well. I want to take you to a hillside where the Israelites were encamped. There's a site up there called Khirbet Kiafa. They've done some recent excavation work there from the time of David. And I think from there we can get a much better visual image of the entire area, although it's a little bit more difficult to get to.
Inside the valley, the Ella Valley. Imagine the fight and the people sitting up there and watch.
Right.
In a minute, we're gonna climb to Kayafa. It's the time of David.
Is that the road we're going up? Oh man, that is so beautiful.
One of the reasons why we wanted to come up here was to see this beautiful view of the Elah Valley. The Philistines, of course, would have been on that side, the Israelites on this side, and you can see how the whole battle would have happened right here in front of you. If you can imagine, for 40 days, Goliath coming out of those hills and standing right down there, they could have easily hurt him.
David goes down and slays Goliath. The Philistines have officially lost, but then the Israelites rush down the side to follow David, and they chase the Philistines toward Gath.
They do, and it says that they fell on the way to Sha'arim. The question is where is Sha'arim? We're not 100% sure, but the word Sha'arim in Hebrew means two gates. When they dug here at Kirbeth Kiapha, this city actually has two gates. And so it's probable that the place where the Philistines were killed were along this road between Kirbeth Kiapha and Gath.
What other value is there to coming up here besides just the view?
A lot of the things they found here are unique, and they're unique to the time of King David, and they're unique to Judean cities. For instance, come on into this room right here, let me show you something. All of these cities had casemate walls, and what you have here are a double set of walls that surround the entire part of the city, but you'll see this gap here in the middle. Well, this gap could be used as an extra room or a storage room. However, in the event that they were attacked, they could fill this with even personal items, but debris and everything, and that would give a huge, thick wall to protect them.
So what you're saying is this type of wall built during David's reign, there are so many things they found here that are dated to that period in the Iron Age, that this is evidence that David was a ruler of more than just a tribal area, that he was a monarch. It wasn't just that he was ruling from Jerusalem. There are cities, walled cities, fortified cities, outside of where he was living.
That's exactly like what we read in the Bible.
To stand on top of this city and overlooking one of his greatest moments of victory. There was a wheat field and there was a vineyard, there was an olive grove. To see the sun moving across that, it just felt so grand. That was pretty special. When you read about David being pursued by Saul, and he moves from place to place to place, the forests of Hereth, or over to Moab to ask the king there to keep his parents safe. He's a fugitive trying to stay one step ahead of him. But this is a decade-long pursuit. There's a lot that happens in between David killing Goliath and him hiding out in a cave. Saul sent soldiers after him a couple different times. He fled to the priests at Nob. He hid out in Gath, Goliath's hometown, and eventually he goes to the cave of Adullam.
If he were to go from Gath to the cave of Adullam, which is what he did, he would have had to walk through the valley of Elah. I wonder what went through his mind. I mean, just prior to this, that was the location where he had been praised because of what he did, and now he's on the run. The caves of Adullam sit in a fairly remote part of the country. I think that's probably one of the reasons why he came out here. He knew that he would be at least temporarily secluded from King Saul and his men that were chasing him. Wow, this is incredible.
It is so much larger in here than I expected.
There are caves heading off in that direction. There's caves heading off in this direction. I can see light down here, so there must be another opening down there somewhere. This is the perfect place for David to hide. He's up high. He could easily go outside this cave. He could see for miles around him.
A natural fortified location. How deep does this cave system go?
You know, I have no idea. You want to go find out?
It looks like the walls have been built up and reinforced.
Right, they may have been filled in. This may have been more open during the time of David.
Oh, surely to fit all those people.
That's right.
David's time here at the Cave of Adullam was very short, and only a couple of verses in 1 Samuel 22 that mention that. Even though it's mentioned so briefly, obviously it makes sense why he came here. Look at how much this opens up in here.
This is huge.
Oh, there's a bat flying around over there. And another tunnel leading out. There are little nooks and crannies all over the place. There's a place for a millstone, a small millstone.
Hey, look over here. Look over here.
Wow. It looks like an entrance.
How deep does it go?
It looks like the wall used to continue around. Maybe it's been backfilled. But the cave continues on the other side.
There's just room after room.
Oh man. Look at this.
Oh my.
It was surreal to think about this being the spot where David hid out, and to wonder which of these entrances was the one that he used every day. Which of these places was the place where he slept? And to think about this cavern being filled up with the people that had come to him, with the soldiers, his mighty men. Could 400 people really have met up with David and hid out here? Once you got into the cave system, it could easily house as many people as the text says that came and united with David here. It felt like we had gone through a time warp back to that day, and you might see David walking around at any moment. After David left Adullam and hid his parents in Moab, he kept moving around.
That's right. We are on the edge of the Judean wilderness. This part of the country only gets about 4 to 5 inches of rain per year. So it had been very important for David and his men to find water, which is why they came here to the streams of En-Gedi.
I would never imagine being in a place so arid as the Judean wilderness and then seeing a waterfall with a stream like this gurgling through.
It's a beautiful place, and of course you can see even here in the middle of the summer, water still comes through here. Take a look at this place. This is very similar to the caves of Adullam in the fact that it's remote. In addition to that, he had a layer of protection here. He would have been able to see when people were coming. The most important thing, of course, is the water. As you walk around this area, you can see for miles, this is the only place where water is. And so water continually funnels through the wilderness of Judea into this narrow valley that comes through En-Gedi. During the rainy times of the year, the water can be actually much higher than we are right now. In fact, you can see some of the markings and stuff on the wall where the water has been up that high during the wet season.
Again, Barry has taken us to a place that the Bible describes David going to during Saul's pursuit of him, and it's not some random place. It makes sense that he went there, and it makes sense why he went there. It's a real place, and you can walk up that canyon yourself. It was at En-Gedi that Saul heard David was there. He brings his troops down, and he needs to take care of some business, goes into a cave,
It just happens to be the cave where David and his men are hiding. He had the peer pressure of his soldiers saying, God has given you a moment. God has provided an opportunity for you to eliminate the opposition. And David goes as far as to cut the king's robe, just the corner of it. And then guilt overcomes him, and he goes out after Saul leaves the cave to let him know, look, your life was in my hands. I could have removed you if I wanted to. For 10 years, David was on the run, trying to keep from being killed by Saul. And it would have been so tempting to cut all of that short by eliminating him in that cave.
He knew this was his opportunity to get back at Saul. But I appreciate David's attitude in the whole thing. Through all of this, he recognized that Saul was the king. He was the king chosen by God. David was a man after God's own heart. He had honor for the king, even though he was in the situation that he was in.
Reading through 1 Samuel, you start to see some really strong contrasts between who God allowed to be king first with who he rose up to be king second. And I think this final battle at Mount Gilboa is the pinnacle of that. At approximately the same time, you have two battles going on. You've got the battle here in the valley, and then you've got David, whose family has just been kidnapped from Ziklag. And they both have to make a decision. How do we figure out what we're going to do? And Saul tries to communicate with the Lord, but the Lord's not responding to him anymore. David, when he gets to Ziklag, he appeals to God and says, should I pursue these attackers? And so you've got this contrast that here's this final downfall of Saul as a king, and simultaneously David, after 10 years of running, is raised up to serve as this new king who's going to expand and stabilize Israel. The battle that is described in 1 Samuel mentions a lot of different geographical locations.
Saul died right here. This is where the end of his life happened. And one of the things I love about the Bible is the geographical accuracy. And you can actually see that here. It mentions at the end of 1 Samuel, the Philistines were encamped at Shunem, which sits at the base of the hill of Moreh across the valley. The Israelites were encamped over here on Gilboa. And the night before, Saul wanted to talk to a medium over in Endor. Endor is just on the eastern side of the hill of Moreh. If you think about that, he went over there at night in disguise, but he had to go around the Philistine army just to get there.
To look down on the valley and have the battle drawn out. This is where people moved, and this is where Saul went at night and snuck around the army and then came back around. You can sense his desperation. What king would do that? The king is the high target in any battle, but he's willing to risk himself at night before the battle starts to try to get someone to tell him what's going to happen, even though Samuel's already told him.
The battle ensued, and that battle took place somewhere between here and the hill of Moreh.
Saul is moving back this way. So as the Philistines are defeating the Israelites are retreating, or maybe trying to get to high ground, coming and moving up Mount Gilboa. Saul takes an arrow, and then he falls on his sword, and then an Amalekite is coming along. Saul asks him to kill him before the Philistines find him, and that's how he dies. And so it all just continues moving this way.
Then his body, as well as the body of his three sons, were taken to Bethshan, and those bodies were hung on the wall of Bethshan.
It was an Israelite city, but it was occupied by the Philistines. They had worked their way that far into the valley.
And the citizens of Jabesh-Gilead found out about it, and they came from Jabesh-Gilead, which is about 30 miles in that direction, took the bodies down, took them over to Jabesh, burned the bodies, and then buried the bones.
I think the author of 1 Samuel, in relating the history of the death of Saul, really wants us to feel the tragedy of what had happened. You know, Saul was selected in a moment of rebellion on the part of Israel. They were rejecting the judges, they were rejecting Samuel as a prophet,
and they wanted a king to fight their battles. They wanted a king like the other nations. And so God gave them what they wanted, not necessarily what they needed. From the get-go, Saul was pretty unimpressive. To see him just so tragically fail and fall here, it's chilling to sit in this spot and to think about that. When we talk about geography and all of the places in the biblical narrative, that seems to fit and to back up what the story says. Coming to these places and seeing where they are and seeing the movement, all of that reinforces the reliability of the text. After David got the news of Saul dying on Mount Gilboa, he ends up being installed as king. He's been chased for over a decade, and so there's a part of him that's probably elated that finally he's getting to do what God set him apart to do. They're setting up some permanent roots, but at the same time, it came at a terrible cost. His father-in-law, the Lord's first anointed, and his best friend, Jonathan, have lost their life. You see that heartbreak when you read his beautiful song, mourning the loss of the Lord's anointed. You see that conflict in him just before he moves to Hebron.
Now, Hebron is actually in the West Bank, and so the situation down there isn't quite as stable as where we have been. And so we'll just have to see what it's like when we get down there. Just pull right over here.
There are two people that are just indispensable to us traveling over here. One of them is our driver, Fauzi, who's just spectacular. And the second is Gus, our guide. And they jumped out and spoke to some of the kids in the yard in the front of the house, and they said, yeah, you can come use our side yard. And so we went around trying to get our perspective, and while he's doing that, the wife of the family sent Fauzi out with a platter to serve us hot tea. They just brought us hot tea from inside the house. It smells delicious.
It does.
Thank you, Fauzi.
You're welcome.
The hospitality here is amazing.
So kind. People are so kind everywhere. Boy, it's good.
Sweet?
Yeah. I'm not really a big fan of hot tea, but this is really good. On the way here, we talked to our guide and our driver. Both of them advised us against going into Hebron, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we can see the city of Hebron from this standpoint. You can see it up there on the hill. It's over 200,000 people. It's one of the largest cities in the West Bank.
The transition to a centralized government really accelerates here. I mean, he moves into Hebron and probably moves about 1,000 people into the city. They didn't all fit. Some of them had to move into the surrounding areas.
It's interesting too, when David asked God, where do you want me to go? God specifically says, go up to Hebron. And I don't know if you noticed it, as we drove here, we're really up in the hills. Hebron is over 3,000 feet in elevation. And so it's one of the highest cities along the Central Mountain Range.
From the excavations that they've done, they found evidence of possible Israelite occupation during Iron Age. They seem to have found a lot of foot traffic that would have gone through the main square there, indicating that there had been an increased presence of people, collared rim jars that are associated with that period of time. They've found the possible remains of David's residence, but it's underneath a building and they haven't been able to dig that up. So there's some significant things at Hebron. As far as the development of the United Kingdom goes, Saul, the first king, made his hometown, Gibeah of Benjamin, his capital. David chose to make his first capital, Hebron, in Judah. But not all of the tribes acknowledged him initially as king. And so it makes sense. You see him choose a more neutral central location in Jerusalem, and it's right on the border of Benjamin and Judah. You see him thinking through, this is more than just my tribe. I'm a ruler over all the tribes.
Something that you hear people say a lot as you travel around Israel is everything is political. There are a lot of conflicting ideas about how things should go, what belongs to whom. But the reality was, we rode up this hillside, there was this Palestinian family, and they welcomed us right onto their property. So what we thought was just going to be a quick stop ended up being this very hospitable visit by some folks who did not know us until we pulled up in their driveway. So on a day-to-day basis, there are just so many people from different ethnicities and religious backgrounds that do get along, and they do make it work, and they just try to be very respectful of each other and their differences. Seeing both En-Gedi and the Caves of Adullam, you get the sense that David selected his hiding places from Saul very intentionally. They gave him some type of advantage or provided some type of very needed resource in each place. And the view from Adullam was just incredible.
That's right, and both places are so remote, that gave him kind of a strategic advantage as well.
And then being on Mount Gilboa, the text is very specific about Saul's movement that night. To stand on the top of the mountain and have you point out the exact same places, you could see them all from that one spot, and to know that that was the spot where the Bible describes him dying.
The accuracy of the Bible in a lot of stories, and especially that one, is so important.
And then to go to Hebron, where after David gets the news of Saul's death, after all this time of waiting, he finally becomes king and establishes his government there, and to realize everything that's been found there. They believe that there's evidence of a central government beginning there and just so many people thriving. That fits David in his first 7.5 years as king. So much of the text is devoted to David. There's so much more that describes his reign. Surely there's more. There's more evidence out there for David.
Well, there is. In fact, we know that David eventually moves his capital from Hebron to Jerusalem. Now, once we get to Jerusalem, there'll be a number of things inside the city I think you'll really enjoy. In fact, the story of how David conquered the city is really, really interesting. After ruling for 7 years in Hebron, David decided to move his capital to the city of Jerusalem. The problem was that the Jebusites were here, and so he needed a way to enter the city and capture it. He issued a challenge to his men, and he challenged them to go up the water shaft. The word in Hebrew is sinor. Sometimes it's translated as pipe, because he knew that would be an entrance into the city, and if they could get someone in there, they maybe have a chance of capturing the city. Joab volunteered for that and was able to successfully get in. For a long time, we didn't understand exactly what that meant in the Bible. But in 1867, a British explorer by the name of Charles Warren came to this land looking for different biblical archaeological sites. And he found this shaft. And he actually climbed up this shaft and discovered this whole tunnel system under here. And he proposed that this was probably the way that the citizens of the Jebusite city came to retrieve their water. And so he proposed that this is the pipe, the water shaft, the sinor that is mentioned in Scripture.
How do we know that this could be that shaft?
This may not have been the exact way that the people retrieved their water at the time, but this is the way Charles Warren came up. There are one or two other shafts in this area that Joab could have come up, but it would have been something very similar to this that would have given him access inside the city.
So it still fits the story, whether it was this shaft or another shaft. There was something just like this that Joab would have come up to help capture the Jebusite city.
That's right.
Why would David ask Joab or one of his men to come up a water shaft in order to help capture a city?
Well, the city of Jerusalem, the ancient Jebusite city, sat on a little peninsula of land that was surrounded by the Kidron, Hinnom, and Central valleys. So it was very defensible. It was very hard to attack the city. I think that's one of the reasons why David wanted the city. There was going to have to be something secret to happen. And as you can see, it wouldn't be very easy to get here. Only one man could come up here. You couldn't pull a whole army. And so probably Joab came up a shaft like this, then was able to open the door and allow the army in.
So it was a very defensible position. Some people have described this spot as the true foundation for the nation of Israel and for the city of Jerusalem itself. You know, most people look at the Temple Mount and they think, that's Jerusalem. Well, it became that, especially during the days of King Herod. But when you come back to the United Kingdom, Saul did a little bit, but David really coalesced the nation around him. It's incredible. It sends chills down your spine to think about. This marks the beginning of that.
And it all started with Joab coming up a shaft like this and capturing the city.
I don't think you can overstate the importance of going down to Warren's Shaft or even the discovery of it. There are so many battles and so many cities that are conquered in Canaan by the Israelites. But to have one that's so uniquely conquered, where you climb up through a water shaft, you know, archaeology plays such an important role in helping us understand how legitimate the biblical text is and how accurate the biblical text is. In this spot, from the Gihon Spring, there was water that the city accessed through these tunnels. To have that detail and then to have a place like that found that fits the description was just invaluable. Going underground and exploring the shaft that Warren found and thinking about Joab going up and helping David conquer the city, I think about going back to our conversation with Scott and thinking about the development of weaponry. In 1 Samuel, the text specifies that the Philistines kept the Israelites from working with metals, that there was no blacksmith in Israel. And if they even wanted to sharpen their farm implements, they had to go to the Philistines to get that done. That makes sense with the rest of what we read in 1 Samuel, where it really emphasizes the weapons that Goliath uses, or the shortage of weaponry. At one point, only Saul and Jonathan are the ones with weapons. You can see the development of arrow tips, spearheads, things that are coming out of that layer of archaeology. Scott put forward the possibility that during David's time where he was hiding out with the Philistines, he actually figured out or discovered that technology and brought it with him. And you start to see that become more prolific during the time of the United Kingdom. Is there extra biblical evidence for the existence of David and his kingdom? Evidence outside of the biblical text?
Well, honestly, there's not a lot. However, in 1993 and 94, a couple of archaeologists who were digging up at Tel Dan found 3 pieces of stone that when they put it together, it seems to have been written by King Hazael from Aram. And he's describing a battle in which he has defeated the kings of Israel and Judah. However, he doesn't refer to Judah as Judah. He refers to it as the house of David.
Now, when do they date this?
About 150 to 200 years after King David lived.
So the value of this is that there's a foreign king who has defeated the southern kingdom of Judah centuries after David actually lived, but he still refers to the kingdom as the house of David. That would be evidence that David was more than just a city leader or a tribal leader, that he had authority over a much larger area.
From his vantage point, he sees the whole kingdom of Judah as being David's family.
And he has no reason to try to substantiate whether David existed or not.
Right.
He's just stating what he knows to be true.
That's exactly right.
That kingdom was referred to by the house of David.
I think it'd be beneficial for us to return to the city of David. Just within the last couple of decades, they've done some great archaeological work there, and they think they've uncovered part of King David's palace.
the current modern Jerusalem just sprawls all over these hills, across these valleys. Most people, when they enter the city, they have this picture of this bird's eye view from the Mount of Olives looking down, and you see the Temple Mount. But that wasn't there with the city of David. You're talking less than 3,000 people. And so really with the city of David, you have this seed of Israel starting as a nation and growing out from its capital.
We are in the city of David, the true location of the ancient biblical Jerusalem. And you can see around us the tourists coming, just exploring again this amazing
Active place. It's a very active place.
We are standing in the palace area. Up till 150 years ago, we didn't know where the city was. Everybody thought that the ancient biblical Jerusalem lies within the confines of the old city. It's only when Charles Warren, by accident, came and he discovered the place that he realized, but listen, this is the actual location of the ancient city.
Archaeologically, how do you establish that this was the palace? How do we know that?
We cannot say 100% that this is the palace.
Right.
This is how archaeology works.
Right.
Unless you find something that is written, David was here,
right,
you cannot say that.
Right.
Elat Mazar, she came and she said to us, guys, I think that this is the location of the palace of King David, and we need to dig down. And we said to her, but we did dig down. She said, you didn't dig deep enough. And we said to her, okay, we are willing to go, but you have to tell us why. And she said to us, 60 years ago, a woman named Kathleen Kenyon found a capital broken into in a landslide, and that capital, it's a Phoenician style. And Phoenicia is the modern day Lebanon. It dates back 3,000 years, and when I opened my Bible, she said, I read about a king, Hiram of Tyre, and he came and he helped David to build his house, Solomon to build his house, and to ultimately to build the house of God. The second thing is we found houses built into the walls of the ancient city dating back to the first temple period. And that means that we are very close to some kind of citadel here. Within those houses we found furniture, and that furniture dates back 3,000 years. The third reason is the city itself lies between two valleys. We have the Kidron Valley, you guys can see it on that side, and at the back of me another. Between these valleys we have the city situated. Very difficult to take the city. So difficult that the Jebusite king said, not going to happen. Elat Mazar, she said, on the north side it is level. It means that you're going to have to put something here to keep the city safe.
Yeah. She came with her Bible in hand and kept reading it and referring to it and looking for reference points and kept finding those reference points as she dug.
I think that's very important. If you want to find the Bible and what's written in the Bible, you have to go to the Bible,
That's
right?
Well, I'm very grateful for her approach.
So are we.
Very grateful.
What's going on currently around this site?
Full-time excavations going on all the time. We started a project with the name Jerusalem Watch, and through that people can actually support the excavations here. You can become part of getting the buckets on the ground so that we can absolutely expose the complete blueprint of the city to the world. So we have a big building, right? How do we say that it's the palace? In 2005, we found a very important seal. 3 years later, we also found another seal. And these two seals are very, very important. Two seals that appears in the same book in the Bible, Jeremiah, in the same chapter, in the same verse, back to each other. Gedaliah ben Pashur, Yuchal ben Shelemiah. Written in the Bible, written on the seals. So that tells us that we are in the governmental area of that time. The time of King David dates back 3,000 years, the time of these guys 2,800 years. And we know that in that time, this was the governmental seat of the city itself.
How does it make you feel to stand in a place like this where such an important point in Israel's history happens?
This city brings the Bible to life 360 degrees. The city of David, Jerusalem itself, leads in the fact that there is unequivocal proof that there is a connection to the Bible. In front of us we can see a wall. It's this wall that led us to find the place here, and we can get a better vantage point of the palace area if we go to that side.
When you see the size of the walls, you can imagine how difficult that must have been for people to try to come and capture the city. And you understand why David would have sent Joab up through the water shaft to get inside.
Correct. If you go down, this even go down more to the Kidron Valley over there, and that's why the city was so difficult to take.
The city of David is such a great location strategically. You have the military fortifications. He's up high, he's surrounded by mountains. And when you talk about Iron Age cities, they're developing the fortifications, they're developing the fortified cities. You're getting more cities with walls. They're becoming less and less nomadic as a people.
You can see a house built into the wall itself. These houses that we found date back to the First Temple period. This house belonged to Achiel. We know that because it was written in pottery that we found. This man, Achiel, was a very important person in the government as well. Firstly, his house is very close to the palace. Secondly, you can see his garage where he parked his donkeys. You can see two pillars over there with holes inside the pillars, and that's where he fastened the donkeys. But more than that, we found an ancient toilet. And for people like me in those days, you had to run a little bit further than your house to do certain things. Achiel had a toilet.
The luxury.
He had the luxury of that inside his house. Seeing houses built into the wall itself, we are reminded of the story of David and Bathsheba, when it says when the time comes when kings go out and fight, the men has to be out of the city, they have to go and fight, and the women come outside. Bathsheba was taking a bath, and now we can see where he was standing and how this whole story played itself out.
Talking about David and Bathsheba is a hard thing to do. When you contrast David with Saul, he's just so starkly different. He's so much closer to God. He's the one described as the man after God's own heart. And then you get this incident where he chooses to take another man's wife to the point that to cover it up, he's willing to send that man into battle and have everyone step back so that he dies. So he has a valid reason to marry this widow so that he can adopt his unborn child. You know, that just seems so out of character for David. But the truth is, it highlights that he was a real man and he made mistakes. In many ways, he's more relatable. He also repented of those things. There were real-life consequences. When he was confronted, as opposed to Saul, he repents and he responds. He doesn't make excuses. He takes responsibility. He's such a model for how to respond when your sin catches you and when you're found out.
We are reminded of the story when Absalom was chasing his father, when he wanted the throne, when he wanted to rule. It says in the Bible that David had to come out with the whole party. He brought the ark out and then he sent it back. And they walked through the valley over there and he went up the Mount of Olives. If you look across from where we're standing in the village over there, in the bedrock you can see that there are tombs. We know that that was an ancient cemetery. So, what do we put together here? David writes in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because your rod and your staff, they will protect me. We also spoke about the hills surrounding Jerusalem. Where we're standing, you can see how the hills surround Jerusalem, and that he wrote, as the hills surround Jerusalem, so God surrounds his people.
To the people that question whether there really was a David or a Solomon, you're standing here and you're looking at where they lived, and you're looking at where the Bible says so many things took place with great specificity. It talks about the routes they took and the places they were, and it's easy to realize that's rooted in reality. What Anna Arena shared about what's going on at the city of David was just fascinating, but a huge part of the United Kingdom story is the temple that David stockpiled for and Solomon ended up building. Is there anything archaeologically that we can see that connects to that?
Well, digging's not allowed on the Temple Mount now. However, a number of years ago, an unfortunate event happened, but it opened up some really unique opportunities for us. Once David and Bathsheba learned that Adonijah was trying to anoint himself king down in Rogel, they put Solomon on the king's donkey and brought him down to the Gihon spring. And what you're looking at below us is the Canaanite pool, dates back 3,800 years, 800 years prior to King David. And many archaeologists believe that this is where the water pooled up from the Gihon spring, and this is where Solomon was anointed king. If you listen, you can kind of hear the water still coming out of the Gihon spring as it travels down the tunnel.
They believe that this pool was in use a long time for the Canaanites and the Jebusites before David made Jerusalem his capital.
Because this has been in the same spot for 3,800 years, we're highly confident that this is the location of where King Solomon was anointed third king of Israel. David was getting old, and he had not formally named his successor. And one of his sons, Adonijah, decided to take that job on for himself.
Over in 1 Kings 1, Adonijah is trying to stage a coup, and he and his friends have gone down to a place called En Rogel. Where is that in this landscape?
It's located right at the bottom of the hill right down there, and that's where Adonijah had his feast. He had priests down there and either generals for his army, and he was trying to proclaim himself as king.
Nathan and Bathsheba come to David and let him know what's going on. His health has been failing. He's not as aware of what's going on. And when he hears about it, he sends Zadok the priest and Nathan and his son Solomon on his donkey down to the Gihon spring, where he would be anointed as the next king.
That's correct. Now, what's interesting about that, here are all the people that are around here.
Yeah.
This is a very public place, and the sound just kind of reverberates through this valley. Well, the Bible tells us that when that occurred, they heard the trumpets and the people were cheering, and that sound reverberated down the valley, and the party that was going on with Adonijah, they heard that. And a messenger came from this area down to En Rogel and said, Solomon has now been appointed the king.
Imagine how Adonijah felt when he heard that in the middle of what he was trying to attempt. And when he gets that message, he rushes back up the hill to where they worshiped and grabbed the horns of the altar, trying to keep Solomon from killing him for trying to take his place. Saul was the first anointed king, and when it was finally time to anoint him publicly, he was found hiding in the luggage. He wasn't really fit and ready to do what God needed him to do. When David's anointed, that's done pretty privately, just with his family, and then he has to wait more than a decade before he's publicly anointed. And this is the first time in the monarchy where the kingship is being passed from father to son. Adonijah is trying to supplant that. You've got this attempted coup, and Solomon is anointed in a rush, but still it's public enough that everyone hears and knows that it's happened. And so even in the process of their anointings, it changes. Even though you go from Saul to David and David to Solomon, and you seem to increase, the nation grows, it expands, it's still not the king that they're looking for. They're imperfect men, and they make mistakes. And even though there's been a prophesied king that's going to come, they're still waiting to see that in the historical record.
Once Solomon became king, he pushed the city up the hill so that he built the temple on the very top.
So with these layers of history, you've got the original Jebusite city that David captured. He expands that city to the point where it becomes Mount Zion, the city of David. But then Solomon takes it to a whole new level, and the city grows to the point where he has to continue moving up toward Mount Moriah.
That's right. He wanted to put the temple as high as he could in the city to give proper reverence to God.
The splendor of Solomon's temple was world-renowned from biblical accounts. We don't have that temple remaining. That was destroyed millennia ago. King Herod built the second temple. That's not even standing anymore. So when people talk about how do we know there was a Solomon? How do we know that he actually built anything? What's left?
I think we need to talk to people who are authorities on the matter. There have been some things found, and I think what's really interesting is how those things were found. Within recent years, there's a project that's been going on in Jerusalem in which they've been able to go through a lot of rubble that's been found underneath the Temple Mount. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Barkai, lives here in Jerusalem, and I think it'd be beneficial if we went and talked to him and see what we could learn from him.
In 1999, as a result of certain political developments, there was a criminal act taking place. I would call it an archaeological crime. A gigantic pit was dug without any scholarly supervision in the southeastern part of Temple Mount under the excuse of an emergency exit. They removed approximately 400 truckloads of earth. That earth was dumped in the Kidron Valley. From there, we moved the soil here. This is the place where the first stage of sifting took place.
How did you know that the earth had been moved from the Temple Mount?
We have eyewitnesses that followed the trucks and came there. A second way of proving it is via the internal contents of the soil. For example, we have several thousands of gilded wall mosaic tesserae, which once decorated the Dome of the Rock. They could come only from the Temple Mount. We have even a seal of the Islamic Trust of the Temple Mount.
Dr. Barkai was able to take us down and explain that they currently process not only the fill that was brought over from the Temple Mount, but they also process and sift material from all sorts of archaeological sites around Israel.
This is the place where the larger stones are removed from the contents of the soil. This is done like this.
I see.
Every one bucket goes in here,
Yes.
and it is subdivided into 3/3. The rest of the space in the bucket is taken by the water.
Okay.
1/3 soil, 2/3 water.
How long does it soak?
Several hours.
Several hours.
As you know, there are people that question whether the first kings of Israel were historical figures or legendary, and whether there's anything that we can tie to that period of time. And it sounds like that you have found some incredible things.
Listen, I'm a Jerusalemite for the last 68 years. I was not around some 3,000 years ago, so I cannot testify for David living here or being here. On the other hand, if I read the scriptures well, there are so many things there which seem to be a reality. I'm dealing with archaeology, I'm dealing with material culture. Solomon built an official compound made up of the king's palace, the construction of which took 13 years. There was the house of the forest of Lebanon, the house of Pharaoh's daughters, there was the great court, there was the other court, there was the house of the Lord. All that becomes alive when we sift through the material originating in the Temple Mount. We have abundance of pottery. We have a plethora of other finds from First Temple period. The period cannot be denied.
Yeah.
Again, I was not an eyewitness.
Right.
I didn't meet them personally, but meeting the material culture of their time and meeting the texts, I have the feeling as if I shook their hands. Temple Mount is the soul, heart, and spirit of the Jewish people. That is the place of traditionally the binding of Isaac by Abraham. That is the place purchased by David from the last Jebusite ruler of Jerusalem, Aravna. That is the place where David's son Solomon built the house of the Lord. And until this very day, all synagogues all around the world, they are directed towards the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. It is also the #1 archaeological site in this country, and maybe in the world. Nevertheless, it was not exposed to the spade of an archaeologist ever. So Jerusalem, which is one of the most excavated places upon earth, has a black hole. Altogether, in these 14 years of sifting, we have had over 500,000 finds. A vast majority of it is, of course, pottery, but pottery is datable. We have only, again, small finds. Those include jewelry, they include artifacts of ancient warfare, they include dice and playing pieces, they include coins in abundance. About 9% of the dated finds that we have are from First Temple period.
Amazing.
Our general work does not try to prove anything or to disprove anything. We are interested in whatever is found. We are interested in the facts and the conclusions that we can draw from the facts.
The difference in this project is nothing is situ. It's all been tumbled together.
That is correct, and that is a challenge.
Yeah.
The sifting project is the closest that we can get to a controlled archaeological excavation in the Temple Mount.
What's the most unique thing that stands out to you that you've found so far there?
The people. It is amazing. Children, elderly, students, religious, non-religious, ultra-religious, all kinds and types of people. And we have had people from all four corners of the world. We have had an incredible number of volunteers. They were about 250,000 people, which makes this project into the most exposed archaeological project in the world. To look into the eyes of a child who finds a coin which was not touched by somebody for 2,000 years, or to look into the eyes of an elderly person who realizes that he touches the sacred soil of the Temple Mount, and the excitement of these people, that is unparalleled. So the greatest discovery of mine was the people.
We're not able to go back and uncover Solomon's temple, and who knows if or when we'll be able to actually do any official archaeological work on the Temple Mount. But from that discarded dirt, the Temple Mount Sifting Project has been able to produce and discover some pretty impressive things. He was able to show us several pieces that dated back to David's time in a united kingdom. No one would have wanted what happened in 1999 to have happened. No one would have wanted that to have been disturbed. But it provided you an opportunity to find things like this. And after doing that for 14 years, what conclusions have you reached about what you have found and how it connects to the Davidic united monarchy?
Listen, I cannot prove through the finds anything. I cannot prove that there was a David, but we have indirect circumstantial evidence that there was much activity at that time. I'll tell you more than that. 5 years after the death of Solomon, in the days of Rehoboam, the country was attacked by Shishak, king of Egypt. Now, why would Shishak attack that place if it was a small village? That attack is documented in Egyptian sources. It would be impossible to assume that 5 years after Solomon, the Bible is historically correct, and 5 years earlier, all of it is fantasy and all of that is fiction. That is beyond my logic.
There's another quote from an archaeologist, and I thought it was interesting, that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
I never ever draw any conclusion from absence of material. If you draw conclusions from the absence of material, you can come to the conclusion that the ancient caveman spoke on radio telephone because we didn't find the wires. That's anti-logical.
Dr. Barkai, it has been an honor to be with you. Thank you for sharing your office and your knowledge with us today.
The privilege is mine.
Dr. Barkai is just a wealth of knowledge. I mean, we could have spent days with him and still not exhausted his knowledge on the topics of archaeology in Israel. Having him explain the significance of what they've found and what it attests to was especially moving. I wish everybody who's trying to answer the question, was there really a Saul, David, and Solomon? I wish all of them could be in those labs. I wish all of them could see those artifacts be brought out. I wish all of them could meet the archaeologists that pulled them out of the ground. They're there and they're real. I think to ignore them is going to hinder anybody's honest search about the reality of the United Kingdom.
One of the things that came out of that period of time was literature and songs, music. Well, that brings us here to Qumran. Qumran sits on the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. You can see the Dead Sea spread out here before us. But behind us is the caves of Qumran. You can see a couple of the caves here, and there are more caves around the corner and throughout these hills. In 1946, a Bedouin shepherd stumbled into one of these caves and found a number of scrolls. They began to inspect them, and they realized that there were scriptures written on them. They found portions of copies of every single book except for Esther. The scrolls actually went through a number of different hands, but today, if you want to, you can actually go and see them at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. They have dated a number of these scrolls to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century BC. And so in particular, if you think about the time of the United Kingdom, these are copies of the originals that were only placed 700 or 800 years after their originals were written.
How many Old Testament manuscripts do we have?
We don't know the exact number, but they're in the thousands. And some of them are very small, but they can use those to piece together a much larger document. There are some books, though, for instance, the Isaiah scroll, in which we have an entire copy of that book available to us. For a number of authors that we appreciate, like Plato and Aristotle, we have less than a dozen copies. However, when it comes to the Hebrew Bible, we have thousands of copies of manuscripts. And because of that, we can have an even greater confidence that what we read today when we open up our Bible is accurate to the original writings.
And you think about what that should do for people. I mean, most historians don't question the authenticity of these other ancient works when they have less than a dozen copies, but it comes down to the Bible or the ancient Hebrew or even the ancient Greek text, and we have thousands, if not tens of thousands of copies. That should reinforce or bolster anybody's faith when they come to realize that. Qumran isn't a place that you would automatically think about David or Solomon or the United Monarchy, but we're told in the Bible Solomon wrote 3,000 proverbs, 1,001 songs. To go back to what does the text say, you need to have a reliable text. It's like building a house. You need to have an accurate blueprint. We can trust what we have. It's accurate, and it's accurate so many times over. And I think that's huge, especially for those of us in the West, especially for young people, college students, high school students, who in the West are being told, no, that's not a historical document, that's just a legendary document, or that's just a cultural document. The details are too specific just to be a cultural document. We find evidence in the archaeological record that fit what's in that document. We have so many copies from independent places around the globe that match. If you came to that question, can we trust the accuracy of the Bible, with an open mind, without bias, and just looked at it fairly, that you'd walk away with the conclusion, I can trust what that says.
These texts were written by the Essenes. Essenes were a Jewish sect, and they lived here at Qumran. And they had particular rooms in which they wrote a number of these documents that were later stored here in the caves. You can see the different rooms.
So this was someone's house.
Yeah.
It'd be such a stark contrast from one side to the other to be able to see the Judean hills over here, but then the Dead Sea over here.
Water is vital for their survival down here. As they collected the rainwater, it would come down this little trough and it would fall into this little bitty pool. Once the pool filled up, it would spill over into this larger cistern. In doing so, it leaves the sediment that was in the water in this smaller pool, so that the water in the cistern was perfectly clean.
So it was an ancient filtration system.
Exactly.
I think it would surprise people to see how many ritual baths and all of the water that would have required.
And they would go through a ritual cleansing multiple times per day. And so the need for good, clean water was important to them. And this could be used as a community room. You can see the seating all the way around here.
What this is explaining over here is this would have been for studying, and that they found a lot of oil lamps for light in this room.
The oil lamps could be easily set up here on these rocks to light the entire room here.
Why did the Essenes find such value in preserving these texts?
Well, I think they found value for the same reasons that we find value. You look at the Song of Solomon, it's a song about the love that he has for a woman. You look at the Proverbs. How often do I open up the Proverbs if I'm having some problem in life? I can find something there that I can use today.
Even Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, the preacher, where he's answering this question of, is life meaningless or not? And he's answering, with God in view, it's not. Without God in the picture, it really feels like it's meaningless.
And of course, then we can look at the Psalms, and we use those same songs today in our praise to God.
A lot of people have the misconception that the Bible's very flat. But with this poetic literature, God is trying to evoke emotions. He's trying to get an emotional response to truth. The books that we're talking about that David and Solomon contributed to are rich, and God included that kind of text, and it was preserved, and those types of writings accomplished that. The people who lived during the reign of Saul, David, and Solomon, they were looking for a ruler. They knew that even from back in the days of Joseph, from Genesis, God had promised a ruler that was going to come from the tribe of Judah. All of these centuries, they've been looking for the Lord's anointed. And that's one of the reasons they got so excited when Saul was finally anointed, why they celebrated David, this man after God's own heart, who was by far an improvement over Saul, and the continuation of his kingship through Solomon and hopefully down through the line. To be on this side of history, we recognize that all of those prophecies were pointing to the true king, God's son, from the tribe of Judah, this man who took on flesh. That was part of what the people thought they saw in Jesus. They had a misconception about his kingdom. They didn't understand that it was a spiritual kingdom, but they recognized there's a king here. That's what they celebrated during the triumphal entry. It's what Pilate asked him about. Are you really the king of the Jews? It's the accusation that went above his cross. And so we recognize that Jesus is the prophesied king. We've been looking for evidences of the united kingdom, but all of the men from that united kingdom just foreshadowed the true king, Jesus. Having Barry bring me here has been so helpful to think about what's the most accurate, best way to answer that question. Is the united monarchy something that has historical roots, or is it simply a myth or a legend? And I think coming here and seeing these places and speaking with these experts, hearing their experience, it helps increase my faith and trust in the biblical record. There's a quote from a book that's currently out of print where the author is trying to help his unbelieving friend wrestle with faith. And I think it just sums up this entire trip. What he writes is, faith is a venture based on evidence. Evidence adequate enough to justify the decision to leap. Evidence adequate enough to create hope in the success of leaping. I would say that my job as an apologist is to encourage responsible leaping. I try to show that the leap is not hopeless, that you can reach the other side, that many have done it before you, that the dangers below aren't as great as you think. Beyond this, however, the apologist can't go. I present the evidence. You must decide to leap. We have all of this evidence, and there's no final proof that is going to convince everybody. At the end of the day, each of us has to make a decision based on the evidence. Is that adequate enough to justify the decision to place my faith in what the text says? And at the conclusion of all of this, personally, the answer is yes. And I hope that whoever's taken this journey with us would reach the same conclusion.